And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey, and we are back here on a Tuesday with a very, very loaded show for you, George. Now that we are just under a month, really, George, we can start counting down the days, not months anymore, more days count down till April 27th, and we get to finally the first round of the NFL draft. We do have some projections for you in terms of what is the best case scenario for each of the five most likely draftable quarterbacks for the Colts? If they do draft one of these five quarterbacks, obviously we know things could go badly. But if they go poorly, if every box is checked, what kind of talent, what kind of success can we expect from each of these five quarterbacks? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. We'll give our predictions on those. Also, George, speaking of those at least top four quarterbacks, the Colts this week are meeting with all four in different parts of the country. So Chris Ballard will be a well-traveled man. He's definitely getting those airline miles racked up this week, going from Southern California to Lexington, Kentucky. We'll meet in person with all four quarterbacks, which brings up something we mentioned about a month, 6 weeks ago, that to me is the worst case scenario for the Colts that does kind of get brought up this week, especially the Colts going to visit in person with each quarterback. We'll tell you what that worst case scenario, that biggest fear is. But George, I figured we start. Well, actually, George, before we can get into this, question for you. Your daughter, is she available to come on the pod? Can she maybe slip us a note of which quarterback she is going to think the Colts are going to pick? Because of all the predictions I've seen for March Madness, she seems like right now the soothsayer. Seems like she's like the truth teller here.
She was all in on UConn. Now, much of that had to do with the fact that she just loves Huskies. That's her favorite dog, and it was obviously bore out for her here. So she won my wife's work pool, and unfortunately, she has commitments at school, which is going to make it tough for her to find the pod. But she has told me that she knows who they're going to take. She's just not going to tell me right now, which is
wow.
I mean, I need to really start working this source pretty heavily, I think, here in the next. So that by the next pod, at least, I know the answer here. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I gave her all the details that she had for the tournament, which are school names, team nicknames, and colors. Those are the major factors that she took into account in her bracket, which kind of makes sense that this year she won the bracket with that criteria. But I don't know which way she'll lean. I mean, we go to Florida every summer, so she might be leaning towards Anthony Richardson. But then Tennessee has a dog on the sideline from time to time, so that might lead towards Hendon Hooker. She likes blue a lot, so maybe Will Levis. It really could go any way right now.
I was gonna say that Kentucky and Florida, their shades of blue are pretty similar. So, and they're also pretty similar to UConn. So, could be a tough choice if you want to go by the color to maybe try to land a quarterback. But have you been getting a lot of calls from Las Vegas area codes recently? Because it seems like, again, your daughter knows something most people do not. So congrats to her. But boy, we got,
she had inside
April
info.
27th, we got to get some sort of prediction here.
Oh yeah, well, I'm bring her on all year just to let her do the NFL picks at this point. She's definitely got a better track record than we do.
Well, the thing that we did, George, not to pat ourselves on the back, we set the bar very low. So whoever comes on the pod, it's very easy to make themselves look better than us. That's for sure.
That was our goal. You know, we were playing 3D chess.
That's true. We are here for you, the listeners. So if you want to feel smarter than us, we did, I think, a very good job when it comes to our predictions this year of doing that. So congrats to your daughter, George. Congrats to UConn and winning a national championship. And maybe, just maybe, between now and April 27th, we'll get some sort of idea of who she thinks the Colts will take. And to me, that's a good enough source, George, where I think if you run with it and sources tell you that this is who the Colts are taking, I feel pretty confident in that source being right.
Oh yeah, I mean, we would get it, put it on the little ticker on the bottom of the pod. Even. I mean, that'll be breaking news. But I don't know. She's pretty tight-lipped about it right now. We'll see if we can get her to talk.
Sounds like she has a price. Good for already at a young age. Very smart. Very smart. That information is going to cost anyone who wants it. She is smarter than a lot of us. That is for sure. Speaking of George, who the Colts are going to take, obviously it's a big mystery. And we've had a lot of discussions already before of who the Colts should take or who they will take. We'll have still plenty of weeks to talk about who they should and will take. But let's talk about, at least to start the pod, forget about who the Colts will take. How about we talk about where the Colts will be drafting, right? Currently, right now, they have the 4th overall pick. And I thought it was very interesting that on Tuesday morning, Todd McShay released his latest mock draft, and he had the Colts trading up from number 4 to number 3. Now, he had them drafting Anthony Richardson, but the pick aside, I found it very interesting that he has the Colts moving up even one spot from 4 to 3, because the one thing I feel confident in when we have gotten really no drips or drabs whatsoever of information from the Colts, very little leaks on who they like. If anything, Chris Ballard has made, kind of put out this front and this stance that they don't like anybody, really, for the most part. I don't think the Colts will trade up. I have a really hard time, and for me, I would be more shocked if they trade up to number 3 than I would be if they draft even Will Levis at this point. I think all 4 quarterbacks are on the table in terms of who they draft, but I really don't think that there's any likelihood they go from 4 to 3, move up one spot. And McShay, at least in his mock draft, what the competition would be giving up would be a 3rd round pick this year and a future 2nd. I don't think Chris Ballard would give up that draft capital to move up one spot to get a quarterback that, again, so far he's put on the front that there's not one guy that stood head and shoulders above the other, and not one guy that he has fallen in love with. Do you think what are the chances you think the Colts come April 27th are picking anywhere but 4th right now, especially in 3rd?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have a strong feeling they're going to move up either. It's just not really their style. I don't think it's going to be a really expensive move. I think a lot of people have talked about possibly like a 2nd this year, maybe a 2nd next year, or even like a 2nd in a later round pick, or maybe you could get next year's 2 and like a 5th round pick this year. I mean, it just really depends on what Arizona's looking for there. Obviously for them, it wouldn't be just moving down one spot. They get the same guy they were going to get at 3. So, whatever they would get in a deal with the Colts or whoever comes up would just be extra for them. But especially in Indy, it would just be like, hey, we're going to pick the same guy. We're just going to get another pick or 2 in the process. The only thing I could think of that would maybe lean towards them trading up, just because, playing devil's advocate, is if they do these visits that are coming up and they make a decision that only 3 of these guys really work for them, and that the 4th, whoever it is not, they're not a horseshoe guy. If you do that, then maybe you move up just to make sure you don't get jumped again. Because that, to me, that's the one big fear here. I mean, you look out around the league, the Raiders seem really interested in moving up. And going from 7 to 3 probably isn't that difficult of a jump for them either. And then also Tennessee. I mean, that to me is the one that you really got to keep an eye on. They're down there at 11, so it'll cost them. But you're talking, the Cardinals' new GM came from that organization. So there is some, trust there already. There is some background between them. That to me is concerning, just from the standpoint of Tennessee's got all the motivation in the world to do this. Why not move up? Here's one other thing that, just because I like to throw out wild things, especially in April, and it doesn't have anything to do with 3, but the Seahawks are doing so much work on these quarterbacks. I mean, they've been probably 2nd to Carolina in terms of the number of people that they've had at these pro days and just the overall public effort they're putting forth, and trying to look at these guys. If Houston's guy is gone at 2, if whoever they want goes at 1, do you think there's any chance they trade down to 5 with Seattle?
Yes, I do. If they are Bryce Young or bust, let's say, and that's the guy that they identify, and he's not there, he's taking number 1, and they are not in love with CJ Stroud, maybe think at 5 they could get Anthony Richardson or Will Levis and are fine with that. Absolutely, I think that the Texans would consider trading down. I don't think they would just take a quarterback to take a quarterback. I will say, if I was Nick Caserio at that point, and you like Richardson or you like Levis and you don't feel comfortable taking him at 2, that's a stupid philosophy. Like if you love Bryce Young, but you're willing to take Levis, you're willing to take Richardson, take him at 2. Like, don't trade down. You should not trade down. Just because, again, the value is the fact that you could risk losing out on that quarterback because you wanted to get an extra 2nd round pick, maybe, I think to me is stupid. Like, if you like a quarterback, go get him. Now, with that said, yes, I do think I could absolutely see a situation where Nick Caserio is Bryce or bust and is lukewarm on any other quarterback. I could absolutely see them wanting to trade down. The thing Seattle is very interesting because you are right. They're doing a lot of work. They have been open, especially with Anthony Richardson. That's kind of been a name that Pete Carroll and they've done a lot of meetings with, done a lot of background with. That could be a player. That absolutely could be a player. You have 2 first-round picks, so again, you can kind of capitalize on prioritizing one for the quarterback, one for a position player. You would assume that Denver's not going to be as bad as they will be, as they were. And obviously, this is the second round or the second first-round pick they're getting, so you're not going to get another first-round pick for them anyway. So while you're there, I would look at Detroit too. You got to strike while the iron's hot. You're there as a good team. Because of, obviously the trade you made, you got lucky. I think if you are Seattle, you are Detroit, you love a quarterback, I would be absolutely calling the Texans. I would actually be absolutely be calling the Cardinals to try to capitalize on being up this high and making a real move to get my quarterback in the future.
That, for me, that's another scenario that, and a dog obviously agreeing here. For me, that's another scenario that might eventually lead to the Colts going up to 3. I mean, just as we're doing hypothetically, like let's say Carolina takes Bryce Young and Houston says, well, that was our guy, and they trade out, Seattle comes up for Anthony Richardson, then you could have the Colts saying, we didn't think Stroud would be there. We don't want to get jumped. We'll go up to 3 and get CJ Stroud or something of that nature. To me, those are the only 2 scenarios that I see where the Colts move up to 3. Something weird happens and Houston trades out at 2. And there's a guy left over that the Colts really like, and they're now like, no, we've got to get there. Or, like I said, you go through this process this week, and you see that there's only 3 guys that are really worth, being taken in the top 5 in your mind, for instance, whoever 3 they would be. I'm not even being particular there. And you just say, I need to get the 3 and ensure that I get one of them.
Stroud, I could see. Yes. If there's a situation where the Panthers go Bryce Young at 1, the Texans, for whatever reason, don't love CJ Stroud, they pass. The team that, if they trade down or take another quarterback and you have CJ Stroud sitting there at 3, I could see the Colts moving up. And I think they should move up at that point. But if it's for Levis and or Richardson, I guess at this point, I just have a tough time seeing Chris Ballard having that much conviction to, even though it's only one spot, trading up and maybe giving up 2 second-round picks, a 3rd and a 2nd. Like, again, I think these are valuable draft picks where if you don't feel that strong about a quarterback one way or another, let someone else do it. Let someone else pay a big price. You could get whatever best defensive players on the board. Try to maybe then, if you're going to move up, use the pick at 35 to trade up back in the first round and try to get Hendon Hooker on your squad. I just don't see at this point, with everything we've heard from Chris Ballard, even though this week now they're going to a full court press of meeting with all the quarterbacks, I just don't see a situation where he is that aggressive and moving up just one spot when always talked about this entire time is how he's lukewarm on the prospects. There's not really one that separates himself from everyone else. He's not really in love. They don't have to take a quarterback. Chris Ballard, at least up to this point, has been someone so far that does wear his emotions on his sleeve in terms of he rarely kind of plays chess or checkers, or I guess really cards is maybe the poker is a better analogy there. He does kind of tell you how he feels. And there's not a lot of gamesmanship. So I don't think for the most part, let's say poo-pooing of this quarterback class is him trying to fake teams out and make it seem like, oh, actually, we're not that interested in order to lower the price maybe of a trade up from 4 to 3 for the Texans and send them a message. I think this is him truly telling you he is not in love with a lot of these quarterbacks. And I don't think we'll see a situation between now and April 27th that he feels this strongly of a conviction outside of a guy that outside of CJ Stroud, whether it's Levis or Richardson, where he would want to move up and give up draft capital to go one spot.
Yeah, I agree completely, man. He just isn't normally that kind of guy that wants to play any kind of games. And we'll get into this here in a little bit. But I also think that they're not at a point yet where they've really done all the work that they need to do on the quarterback class. And I think that's part of, what our fear was, when Carolina jumped up, that, they've had such a long off season dealing with things like how long it took to hire Shane Steichen. It took longer than expected for him to fill out his coaching staff. I just think they're behind. I think that they are not as far along in the quarterback evaluation as they normally would be when you get into April. And that factors into this too. Because just as, potentially they got jumped at number 1 because they were behind, someone could trade up to 3 before they even have made a decision solidly enough about one of these guys to move up. So
Good point.
I just think that that's, I think that's another part of this. It sounds like you've got, I'll just put it this way. It sounds like you've got other teams out there, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's the Titans, whether it's the Seahawks, who are more committed right now to one of these prospects than the Colts are at this point.
That's a really good point, because I didn't even honestly think about that. You're right. Like, the Colts slow playing this. It cost them the first overall pick. Me and you both felt strongly that was a big missed opportunity for them. And you're right. Now, as we're recording this on April 4th, this is the week that the Colts are doing kind of their in-person homework, if you will. They've watched all the film, but now they're actually seeing these prospects, talking to them, having a good feel of who they are, what they stand for, stuff like that. Well, if you have other teams that, again, have already expedited their process in terms of doing their homework, talking to guys they like, you're right. They're not, like, no one's waiting for the Colts to make up their decision and make up their mind of which quarterback they like. If you're the Cardinals and you get an offer that you think won't be topped, you may, just like the Bears did, there's no reason for you to wait when you get closer to the draft, especially too, unless the only thing that could benefit the Cardinals is a crazy scenario where Bryce Young or CJ Stroud falls to number 3, and now that pick is more valuable than it was now, as we're sitting here on April 4th, when we believe both those quarterbacks will be off the board. That's the only benefit of Arizona waiting. But if a team like the Raiders, let's just say, is crazy enough to say, you know what, screw it, here's a first round pick, you take it right now, we want to go from 7 to 3. If you're Arizona, you absolutely take that. I think you take that, you say, okay, thank you very much. You're probably not going to do much better than that. Maybe you get an extra little bit later round pick, again, if a Stroud or Young is there at 3. But if it's not, I think that pick is no longer as valuable. So again, they're not going to wait for the Colts. That's a great point, George, that if teams are anxious, if the Raiders are anxious and saying, you know what, we want to get to 3 now, just like the 49ers did a few years ago, and they said that we want to get to 3 now, we'll figure it out later and see how the draft board shuffles out, but we will at least guarantee we are going to get the 3rd quarterback in this draft, then yeah, no one's waiting for the Colts. And the longer they take to drag this out, that's kind of the detriment that they've done to themselves, whether it was the long head coaching search. I appreciate the attention to detail. I appreciate, the actual work being put in to make sure you're getting the best candidate. But also at the same time, there is that negative of it, of just when you take your time, other teams are not on your schedule. Other teams are faster to make a decision, and that could have you lose out. It did with the 1st round pick, and it absolutely could happen with the 3rd round pick. Third overall pick,
one more factor that could play into this. I mean, I don't know what the truth of it is, but the word out there was that Arizona was asking from Carolina at number 3 for basically a similar package to what the Bears got for number 1. That was going down to 9. Cool. So that might be the other factor here. I don't know how far the Cardinals want to drop. We really haven't discussed that very much in this process, but that's the other factor here. They obviously didn't want to go down to 9 that early. If that was the price, if those reports are true, I mean, you never know, but that's what I had heard, is that Carolina was talking to them at 3 and the price was about the same as it was to go to 1. So why not just go to 1? We'll see how that plays out, down the road here too. But that, I think, is another factor. How motivated is Arizona, to move down to 7, for instance, and what will that cost be?
Well, George, as someone who I think multiple times on this pod pounded the table and saying there's no way the Bears, when they trade down for the first time, will go past 4. They desperately want to go either to the Texans at 2, the Colts at 4. I'm pretty sure I even had the audacity to say the Colts have leverage in this situation because the Bears don't want to go down that far. And as dumb as I look now with them going down to number 9 and the Panthers trading all the way up to number 1, I cannot double down. I, in good conscience, cannot sit here and tell you, well, the Cardinals, no way they'll trade down to all the way to 11 with the Titans. They definitely want to, trade down to the Colts, or maybe they're willing to go to the Raiders at 7, but they'll give the Colts or the Raiders a discount as to not move down that far. I've gotten burned with that once. I will learn my lesson and say this, that there's absolutely a legitimate chance if the Titans blow the Cardinals away with an offer, Arizona will have no problem going down from 3 to 11. That's for sure. So again, just like we're talking about, the Colts take their time, or the Colts don't feel that much conviction, they're not going to get a discount, and they are not going to have other teams wait for them to make up their decision before they decide, oh, let's trade out of, in the case with the Bears, number 1, or in this case with the Cardinals, pick number 3. Let me throw this scenario by here in terms of, who and where the Colts will draft before we kind of get to the Colts meeting quarterbacks here. Would you rather have, which scenario would you rather have, A or B? Option A, Colts trade up with the Cardinals, go from 4 to 3, give up, let's say, I don't know, a third and a second, 2 seconds. The draft competition is about the same. So let's just say a third and a second round pick to go from 4 to 3 and draft either Richardson or Levis. That's option A. Or option B would be stay at 4, take the best available player. Let's just say Will Anderson for argument's sake there. Then use that pick at 35, trade back into the first round and get Hendon Hooker. So we'd rather trade up and guarantee getting Levis or Richardson, your choice there, number 3. Would you rather stay pat at number 4, best available player, trade back in the first round to get Hendon Hooker? Which option you like?
I think I'm going to surprise you here because for the longest time I've been, stay at 4, take like Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, do something like that, go back to Hooker. But I am getting very nervous that you're not going to get him doing that. It sounds like he's rising up boards. Now, who knows? Maybe people are throwing stuff out there. It's been lying season for a while. It is now the height of lying season. Once we get into April, now you can pretty much believe nothing that you hear. So that's all part of this. But I do worry now about doing it this way and then having Hooker gone before you're able to get back on the clock. Because of that, I would honestly, at this point where the Colts are, I would trade up the 3 and I would take Richardson, just because of the upside. Because between the two of those guys, Richardson and Levis, I think Richardson has a better chance of becoming, a real game changer in the league. So just because at that point I would know, okay, I can get him. I know the upshot is incredible. And the other way, I'm not guaranteed anything. And I don't think you can, as much as we said before that you had to come out of this draft with Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, which I still believe was the case. Now the worst case scenario is not getting any of the top 5, which I think is on the table if you pass at 4.
I will go with option B. I think at this point, and I'm with you, that I thought for sure there would be, even 2 weeks ago, not a world we'd be living in where the Colts would not take a quarterback in the top 4. But at this point, again, I don't really, if it's Richardson, Levis, or Hendon Hooker, I'd rather have, honestly, I get a 2 for 1. I'd rather get the best available player, Will Anderson, and try to help shore up your edge rush and then trade back in the first round. I'm not believing, George, a lot of the Hendon Hooker hype because I still think there's too many variables negatively impacting him. The torn ACL, where he's going to miss a good amount of this season, and also, too, his age. He's 25 years old. For me, none of those factors impact me personally. But I just think that that's going to help kind of push him down the board where, yes, I think the Colts can't sit there at 35 and expect him to be there. But if you are aggressive, trade, I don't know, let's say for argument's sake, pick 25, 26, you get back into the first round. I think you can absolutely get him there. I don't think he'll make it a pick 35, but I don't see him going pick 10, pick 11. Like, I just think right now, if you are the Raiders or the Titans, 2 teams that presumably, again, are interested in getting a quarterback, I think they're going to be more aggressive, more likely to get either Levis or Richardson compared to a guy that, again, has a torn ACL and is 25 years old. I'd rather take the risk if I'm Chris Ballard of getting a 2 for 1, if you will, compared to trading up to number 3 and getting one or the other.
There's also a lot of questions about that offense at Tennessee. I mean, there's a lot of things that are dragging him down at times here, whether they're fair or not, whether you agree with them or not, they're all out there. The age, the injury, and the system that he was in. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I saw where he was like sort of throwing at his pro day, like not throwing in the sense that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud were, but he was out there with football throwing it around, which I think is a good sign. I mean, he said at the combine that he was going to be ready for training camp, and it looks like, my medical expertise here, it looks like he's on pace for that. But I still don't, as part of what you're saying, even if he's ready for training camp and that's the first snaps he takes with your team, when is he realistically going to be able to get on the field? I still think he misses the first half of the season at minimum. And all of that plays in. There's no doubt. You want to use a first round pick on a guy that you might basically be redshirting and will be 26 when he takes his first meaningful snap for you. I don't know. There are a lot of questions there. There's no question about it.
I think those questions will help keep him available for the Colts. I think they can risk passing him at 4, drafted the best available player, and then circling back at 35 to come back and get him instead of risking, and thinking that he could be gone. Again, like I said, it's been Hendon Hooker's name's been buzzing in the last few days and weeks for sure. I'm just not buying into the sense that it's going to lead him to being a top 15 pick And all of a sudden now, if you're Chris Ballard and you say, you know, I'm going to punt at 4, I'm going to circle back later in the first round to get Hendon Hooker and get that 5th-year option and get him on my team and kind of get it almost like a 2-for-1. I don't think you have to worry that you'll be sitting there pick 16 and 5 quarterbacks are off the board. It's like we do, I think every year, the number of quarterbacks going to the first round is always overhyped. It's always, if there's 5, no doubters, it's always 6 or 7 sneaking in. This year, it's 4 guys. There's always 5 or 6, slotted. Oh, this guy could go. This guy could go. I think it's always 1 or 2 overshot each year in terms of prediction-wise of how many will go in the first round. I think that, to me, is a case where Hendon Hooker, I think, will go, but later in the first round. And the Colts are absolutely there at 35. We'll have a chance to circle back and get him. But boy, oh boy, it's going to be this draft day, George, continues as we get closer to get more and more mysterious. It should be the opposite. We should have more clarity, more thoughts, but it continues to actually get more muddy, more murky than anything else.
No, there's no doubt. Well, I mean, when we're talking about, rumors and buzz, the last week was full of Will Levis talk with the Colts, and they like him more than most teams, and he's their guy at 4. If that's the case, they're definitely not trading up to 3, because I think almost everybody is in agreement that Will Levis will be on the board when the Colts pick at 4.
I was going to say, that's a good point too. If we're talking about the possibility of them trading up from 4 to 3, I think any team, whether it's the Colts, whether it's the Raiders, the Titans, it's for Richardson, right? Like, no team is trading up to number 3 to get Will Levis.
I don't see that happening. No, I mean, look, the way this offseason's gone, I don't know how much I want to be definitive on anything, but I feel as good about anything in this draft to say no one's trading up to 3 for Will Levis.
Which, by the way, now, since it's Lion season, I think you brought the report. I think it's a good conversation to have. Your reporter, so I want your reporter hat on this one. Jeremy Fowler, amongst others, is reporting that there's a lot of now buzz with the Colts and loving Will Levis. For me as a fan, I see that more as, I think this is the Colts having a smoke screen to say, you know what? I think they are best case scenario for the Colts. I think right now, if you're Chris Ballard and you could shoot him up with truth serum, he would say Anthony Richardson at pick 4 right now, best case scenario. I think this Will Levis buzz is to try to get some teams concerned or scared that, we think Will Levis could drop, so we better trade up to number 3 and go get him and not, let another team trade up and maybe get Richardson or think that Will Levis will get past 4 with the Colts. I think to me, this is more of a smoke screen to help get Richardson past number 3 and to Indy at 4. You hear a lot of these rumors. You see the Will Levis buzz recently. Would you say it's more truthful, or would you say it's more of a little bit of a smoke screen?
I was interested. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not a good report because Jeremy Fowler's got good sources. But when I look into what he actually was reporting, there just wasn't much there. I mean, he said they're doing their homework on him. Well, that's true of all 5 of these guys. They're doing their homework on Bryce Young. They're doing their homework on CJ Stroud. They're doing their homework on Anthony Richardson. They're doing their homework on Hendon Hooker. And yes, they're doing their homework on Will Levis. That it would be derelict for them not to do that. So like that part of it, I think meant much. And the rest of it really is just speculation from other teams connecting dots and saying, we think the Colts are interested in Will Levis. Now, a lot of that comes from the fact that it's not hard to look at the guys that Ballard has drafted and look at the guys that he's brought in as free agents and see Will Levis fitting that mold. I think a lot of people will agree that Will Levis looks like a Ballard quarterback in a lot of ways. I think that's all this is. So, is it, that's why I don't know. Is there like a lot of fire there, or is it mostly just smoke? I think it's mostly just smoke. It's other teams saying, look, looking at what Chris Ballard has done in the past, at the type of players that he likes, we think he likes Will Levis, as opposed to somebody with the Colts or somebody with knowledge of the decision coming down and saying it's Will Levis. To me, those are 2 very different outcomes. And I do agree with you. I think some of it is maybe Colts scouts putting some things out there, that other teams are picking up on, trying to get Anthony Richardson, teams to feel like they don't have to trade up to 3. But if you're Seattle right now and you're hearing this and you're believing this, you're not going up to 3. Anthony Richardson will be there at 5 for you. And I think that's the goal of this for sure. Doesn't mean it's not true. They may be, I guess what I'll say is I wouldn't be shocked if they like Will Levis a lot because he does check a lot of the Ballard boxes, but I just don't, once April 1st comes around, I don't really believe anything I hear the rest of the way to the draft, because it's everything right now is an agenda.
Oh, 100%. And going back to before, when we were kind of talking about, at least for me, up to this point, I think Chris Ballard, for the most part, has not really been a smokescreen kind of guy. At least when he's talking himself, I think for the most part, it is coming from a place of truth and honesty. But the Colts, I think now, especially heading to the stretch run here of the draft, you need to use this mystery to your advantage. Because, like you said, the Colts, for the most part, have been very tight-lipped. And I give them a lot of credit. It's been ever since Jim Irsay made that blunder with Jeff Saturday. We'll use the word blunder to keep it very simple and very nice here. Throughout the entire head coaching search, we got no info, right? It's basically a crapshoot of, oh, we think they like this guy. We heard one good thing about Raheem Morris, but you haven't heard basically anything from the Colts leaked out of who they liked, who they didn't like when it comes to the head coaching search. And that led them to Shane Steichen, obviously. And now in the quarterback search, like you said, with Jeremy Fowler's report from ESPN, especially that them liking Will Levis, it was a lot of speculation, was a lot of other teams kind of almost guessing of, oh yeah, we think they like Will Levis, and that's who we think they're going to take at number 4. But what we kind of said before, and I still think this is the truth, even though the Colts don't sit there at number 1, I still think the guy who's making the final decision at quarterback, I think still will be Shane Steichen. I think that when you hire Shane Steichen and your main goal of hiring him is his developmental skills with quarterbacks, and you see whether it's Phillip Rivers, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, he's worked with different styles of quarterbacks. I think right now while Chris Ballard has a blueprint, I still think that Shane Steichen is going to be, at the end of the day, if he likes a certain guy and he's there, I think the Colts will draft him with Shane Steichen's approval. But because there's so much mystery and there's so much variation of the style and the type of quarterbacks Shane Steichen has worked with, I still think it's a crapshoot because no one really knows. Now, this is his first draft. He has been with different teams and different quarterbacks, so you can't really say, oh, you can't say he's like Frank Reich, where Frank Reich loves these big, tall quarterbacks, and I think it's either, 6'4" or 6'5", I forget the exact height, but he's worked with every quarterback he has had as an OC or head coach has been over 6'4", that he's at least started outside of Sam Ehlinger, which is not going to count because he didn't exactly want to play Sam Ehlinger. But like Frank Reich has a type and a prototype. We have no idea what Shane Steichen prefers. We have no idea if he likes working with the Jalen Hurts model. We have no idea if he prefers more of the Justin Herbert, Phillip Rivers style. Like, he's had success with all 3. We don't know what he likes. So if you're the Colts, I think you have to use this mystery to your advantage. And yes, if you do at the end of the day like Anthony Richardson the most, you better be pumping out left and right. Will Levis, Will Levis, Will Levis. And hope that, again, motivates a team to go up to 3 to get Will Levis and have Anthony Richardson drop to 4, or vice versa. If you love Will Levis, well then, put out a smokescreen that Anthony Richardson is your guy and have a team, again, get nervous, trade up to number 3 and have your guy fall there. This is the best opportunity for the Colts, I think, to create a smokescreen because there's really so much mystery around this team for the first time in a long time.
If I had to guess, though, I do think they prefer Richardson. For one thing,
Same.
Morocco Brown was down there at his pro day. That was the highest ranking official they sent to anybody's pro day. And is that like the end all be all? No, but it is telling. It is, important. And I just think there's been a lot of smoke around Richardson for a while. I mean, going back, I had heard the first time I heard the Colts liked Anthony Richardson was October. Just so you know, like how far back this goes.
Wow.
But at the same time, they saw Will Levis live 4 or 5 times this year. They were at a lot of Kentucky games. So it's hard to say. I think a lot of times when you're going back through, confirmation bias is a big thing this time of year. And I think they knew, certainly from the second Tennessee loss, they knew they were going to be in the quarterback market in this draft. So you could probably go find reason to back up any of these guys if you want. If you're really looking for it, I'm sure you can find reason to back up any of these guys as their guy because they were doing their homework and they've been doing it for a while. So, I don't think it's that hard, I guess, to find evidence that they like one guy. And that, to me, is what this Levis report is, ultimately. If I wanted to go find a report that it's Hendon Hooker, I could probably build a case for that, and I could probably find other executives who agree in it. I mean, that's my point is I think any of these guys, probably not Young and Stroud right now because they're sort of the thought of 1 and 2. But everybody else, I think you can make a case and there'll be like good evidence where you could point to it, and people would say that really makes sense. And it should be that way. I mean, if they're not looking at all the quarterbacks, that would be the worst thing they could possibly do.
Agreed. You have to have flexibility. You have to be prepared for hell breaking loose. And like I said, if there's a situation where all 5 quarterbacks are off the board, you even got to be ready for, if you like a Jake Hayner later on in the draft, like I said, you got to be going through, this is the time where there's so much time. You have to prepare for each and every possible situation that could come across your desk. Because the last thing you want to do is be sitting there, hands up, saying, what the hell do we do now? That is obviously the worst case scenario. So credit to the Colts, at least in terms of doing their homework. Speaking of which, they are meeting with all 4 quarterbacks this week. They are down in Southern California on Monday, meeting with CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. They are meeting later this week with Anthony Richardson, and also meeting later this week with Will Levis. We talked this before, George, and this brings up a big fear of mine. My biggest fear is that now that the Colts are finally starting the week of April 3rd, getting down there, meeting with these quarterbacks, and seemingly kind of doing a lot of their in-person work for the first time this offseason, my biggest concern is that they fall in love with CJ Stroud or Bryce Young and are sitting there at pick 4 and saying, why the hell do we not trade up? Why the hell, when you have all 4 of these quarterbacks, meeting with them within a week, you order your board Stroud, Young, Young, Stroud, and you're sitting there saying, holy smokes, we blew an opportunity to get the best quarterback in the draft, or 2 guys that we think are even, and we could have got one or the other at pick number 1. Now we're going to get most likely neither. We screwed ourselves. That's my biggest fear, and that's brought up this week when you're meeting with all 4 quarterbacks. And it just goes, I really hope we're not sitting here in a situation, George, where they don't like Levis, don't like Richardson, and now kicking themselves because they didn't move it to number 1. But there's a real chance that their deliberate approach is going to come back to backfire.
Yeah, we talked about that when they didn't trade up to 1, that you hope that you don't get to April and suddenly have buyer's remorse, or in this case, I guess, non-buyer's remorse, and because you didn't move up. I don't know how big of fear it really is, in that they are taking their time. There's no question about that. But I also think they had to at least have an outline of an idea. It wasn't like they're starting from scratch. And they're, at least early on, their evaluation had to be that there wasn't somebody worth the number 1 overall pick, at least not what they were going to have to give up to get the number 1 overall pick. So I don't think there'll really be like regret on their part for that reason. I think they made the choice in that moment that would still be made. And you've heard Ballard say it before, and that's not ruling out that they won't come away extremely impressed by CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. I just think you've heard Ballard say it before, that you got to make the best choice that you can, with the information you have on hand at the time, and then you just move forward. I just don't think it's in his nature to sit back and lament what might have been. It's just not him. You know what I mean? But I do worry. I guess I worry more about, you get there and you just, after you do all this in-person stuff, you just don't feel like even Richardson or Levis is worth the number 4 overall pick. I think there's more a chance of that at this point, honestly. Not that it will happen, but that's the end of it that I worry on. And then you're kind of, like you said, you're still kind of stuck and throwing your hands up. And what do you do? I think that's where you do, the plan B that we talked about earlier. If that's what happens, that's where you go to best defensive player, and then you go and try to get Hendon and Hooker later. But that to me is the realistic like downside to this, that you get there and you're with these guys, and there's just something about it that gives you pause about taking them this high in the draft, because this is the 4th overall pick we're talking about here. It's not the middle of the round. It is a very valuable pick. You need to come away from this with, what they call blue players. You have to come away with a franchise guy that you believe in 100%. I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's where we both agree. That's why moving up made the most sense, because you've got to walk away on April 27th feeling like you got the guy. You got somebody that is going to, help this franchise for 10 to 15 years, whatever position it is. And I think that would be my concern going into this process, is that they get there and they look around and they just don't feel like either of these quarterbacks that are likely to be there is going to be the guy.
What's a worst case scenario for you? Is it they meet with all 4 quarterbacks this week, realize, shoot, we messed up. We should have got to number one or number one because we love CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, and we have figured out, especially with meeting with them in person, there's a clear line of delineation between Stroud and Young versus Levis and Richardson. Is it worse that the Colts have regret of not trading up because that's how strongly they feel about Bryce Young or CJ Stroud? Or is it a worst case scenario that they go meet with Will Levis and Anthony Richardson and don't like either? Come away with, oh God, either of these guys I'm not really feeling thrilled with. And at 4, we're probably not going to take it. What's worse, having a regret of not trading up to number 1 or sitting there number 4 and not liking the other 2 quarterbacks?
I think having the regret is worse of not going up to 1, because I think in that scenario, that's where you talk yourself into somebody at 3 or 4 that you're not absolutely in love with. If you get down there and you feel like, man, we swung and missed with Stroud and Young, I think that's what leads you to overrate Richardson or Levis. If you come away from this process thinking that Richardson and Levis aren't really, at that level, then there's other things you can do, like we were talking about. You can go and get that defensive player, and then you can look for a Hendon Hooker or a, Jake Hayne or Tyson Bagent, I don't know, Sterling Bennett, whoever you want to get, at some point. I just feel like that's a better situation to me to be in, because you have options. If you're sitting there and you're really regretting, not trading up to 1 for one of those top 2, that's where I think you double down on the mistake. And that's why I don't think that'll happen. I honestly don't even think that they'll find that they don't want one of these other guys, because my takeaway is that they felt like there were 3 at least and maybe 4 guys that were pretty close. And that's why they didn't go up to 1. And they pretty much said that. And if that's the case, then I doubt they're going to come in to this process feeling much regret, or really, suddenly being shocked and feeling like there's nobody there for them to take. I think this is more about getting that last piece of the puzzle that Chris Ballard always wants when he finally makes the pick. I think they had enough time to get looks at these guys to have at least a preliminary idea to rule guys out. I'll say that. I don't know if they had enough time to really stack the board 1 to 4, but they had enough time to say not him. I think now they obviously haven't done that, or they wouldn't be meeting with all 4 of them. They don't have to do that. There's no bylaw in the NFL rules that says you have to go meet with the guy. Reggie Wayne never met with them before he was drafted. So, it's not a part of the process that's essential. To me, the fact that they're going to meet with all 4 of them means that they believe there's at least a chance that all 4 of them are worth that pick. I think this is really just that last piece that Ballard always wants, that character piece of the puzzle. He wants to sit down with these guys, find out who they are as people, and make a decision. I think ultimately they're going to be pretty comfortable. I just think, remember when I said I had paralysis by analysis earlier this offseason, just because there were so many things moving on? I think the Colts are there right now. As far as the quarterbacks go, I think they really don't see a lot of separation between these 4, and maybe it does happen during this week. But I just think that they honestly are confident that they can win with any one of these 4. And that's probably coming from the coaching staff. I mean, I think there's a lot of faith right now being put in, not just Shane Steichen, but also Jim Bob Cooter. He's been around Peyton Manning, Matthew Stafford, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to have a big say in this process as well. I think he's going to be a guy whose voice is going to be heard. But I don't think they would get to this point where they're actually going and doing the meetings without feeling pretty solidly about each of these guys.
Here's my concern is that I would agree with you that Chris Ballard, especially come combine time, I think was very prepared on all 4 and had an idea. Okay, all 4 are muddled. There's no clear number 1 guy, so we're just going to sit pat for right now. But my concern is, especially when you get into meetings and you hear Shane Steichen, he talks about what he likes. He said accuracy, decision-making, playmaking, and the 3 things he looks for in a quarterback. But he has said multiple times, that the biggest basically thing he looks for, the biggest thing he really wants from a quarterback is their desire to be great. Like basically, are you obsessed with the quarterback position? Are you obsessed with getting better? And now is when you can really find that out. You had 15 minutes of the combine for each. It's kind of like a little bit of a car wash. So again, it's tough to really, in that 15-minute span where each quarterback is going from team to team to team, to get that much information. And so my concern is with how fast and how early the Panthers moved up from 9-1. Well, I think especially the coaching staff, which again, at the end of the day, I think they're the ones making the decision, or at least they're going to be the ones stacking the order of 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterback wise. They were not ready then to make a clear decision of, okay, this is my number one guy, no doubt about it. And he's going to, he's worth a first round pick. My biggest concern is now that Shane Steichen and the rest of the offensive staff had plenty of time to not only break down the film, but also start to kind of talk about traits. And now they're meeting with each quarterback in person this week. My biggest fear is that they're going to come away, again, not that they didn't do their homework before, but now, especially when you meet each of these guys in person, saying, man, Bryce Young is the truth. Or CJ Stroud, that's the dude, we need to have. And now you're sitting there at 4 or even 3 and can't get them. So I think, at least in the scenario I threw out there to you originally of what's worse, the Colts out of this week coming out and saying, man, we really missed on CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. Those are by far the 2 guys in this draft. Or you coming out of this week saying Richardson, Levis, not for us. I think the worst case scenario is Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, just because we've talked about it. If you identify the guy in this draft, there's no price, in my opinion, that's too high. Whether it's what the Bears gave up, whether it's even more than the Bears gave up, I don't think there's a price when it comes to getting the guy at quarterback that is too much, that is too expensive. And now, so that's my biggest fear is, like you said, if the Colts sit there and they come out of it all 4 saying, okay, we like CJ Stroud, we like Bryce Young, but Levis, Richardson, we don't really, we're not feeling it. You still have options at 4. You still have the ability to draft the best defensive player. You still have the ability to circle back and get Hendon Hooker. You still have the ability, if you really want to roll out with Gardner Minshew and see where you end up, in this year, and then see how next year's draft falls out and go from there. As George fight on your right, maybe get Caleb Williams and tank for Caleb Williams. We know Gardner Minshew is the man if you want to tank, maybe to put you in that position. The Jacksonville Jaguars know that very well. So it's one of those situations where I think it's going to be a lot worse if you are the Colts and you say, man, I love CJ Stroud or I love Bryce Young. And you are sitting there now a month or 2 removed after the Panthers make the decision and you can't get them. That is way worse to me than not loving Richardson or Levis and saying, yeah, we're going to pass on a quarterback at 4.
I think the most important thing, and Ballard has not done this, there's a lot of things that you can take him to task for. He's really not done this. And I think they've got to avoid it now more than anything, is talking yourself into something you don't really believe in, and I think he said it again and again. When he says you don't just take a quarterback, that's what he means. Don't, and they've absolutely got to avoid that here. If there's somebody at 4 that you love, if they like both Richardson and Levis and they feel like they've got a really good plan for both of those guys and they see the path to victory with both of them, then go ahead and do it. But I think the worst scenario, and that goes for Stroud and Young too, the worst scenario is just to pick somebody at 3 or 4 because you feel like it's what you should do.
Right. You have to
talk yourself into it. And I don't think they're going to do that. So I think they'll avoid the worst case scenario. I think if they do come away from this, in either scenario we're talking about, where they really regret, having passed on Stroud and Young, or they just don't feel like Richardson and Levis have it, I don't think that they'll hesitate to, shock the world and not take a quarterback at 4. We've seen Ballard do it before. He's said before a million times he doesn't really care about the headlines the day after the pick. He cares about, ultimately how things turn out. And so I think he will stay true to that. So while I have fear about how this is going to turn out, I don't fear that the absolute worst case scenario will come to pass.
The last thing I'll say before we get to quarterback projections is I'll say this, George. I think for the most part, hearing Jim Irsay at the owners' meetings last week kind of talk about almost talking himself out of Lamar Jackson in part because he kind of made it seem like, he's kind of all in on the Colts drafting a quarterback and does not want to, give up draft capital, give up, pay a big time contract extension, and seemingly has a good idea of where the Colts are, which is not very close right now. I think with saying that, I think Chris Ballard, for the most part, I think his job is pretty safe, and I think he'll be back next year. Just because I think the way you hear Jim Irsay talk, I think he's now bought into the plan in the future rather than, again, trying to get a quick fix and trying to win right now. I think the one thing that could get Chris Ballard fired, though, this year is if they go this week, they fall in love, they tell Jim Irsay, look, it's Bryce Young and everyone else. We don't like Stroud. We don't like Levis. We don't like Richardson. We're not taking any of these guys at 4. We may not even, like Hendon Hooker, so we're not going to go all out for him. And I think it's kind of one of those quarterbacks. It's them or bust. That could lead Jim Irsay to be like, well, why didn't we see this before? Like, why weren't you on top of this sooner? Again, Chris Ballard was the one who was doing all the research and was doing all the prep for the second half of the year and also the beginning of the offseason. I know we had a head coaching search to get, done as well, but we talked about Shane Steichen, his lateness to the game, and Parker, as he was in the Super Bowl, he didn't have the amount of time to look into these quarterbacks by the time the combine came around as Chris Ballard did. I think that could lead him to get fired if they come out of this week saying, man, we swung and missed big time because we should have had, Young or Stroud or maybe even Richardson way above everyone else. And we really, messed up not kind of having this guy clear cut number 1 above everyone else. And why did it take so long for you to see that, Chris Ballard? I think that's the only situation right now that could maybe lead to him not being the GM this time next year.
Irsay's comments to me, though, kind of suggest that they do like somebody, and they like somebody they think will be there. I mean, when he said what he said at the combine or at the owners meeting, that's what I kind of took away from that, is that there is a rookie out there that they feel like is realistic for them. Now, who knows? I mean, we talked about already today some strange things that could happen. We think we know the draft order right now. It doesn't mean it'll be the draft order on April 27th, and it could shake some things up. But I feel like they either feel like there's a guy they're either like really high on Anthony Richardson, who they should be there at least at 3. And if that's the case, maybe you do trade up and get him, or they're high on both Richardson and Levis, or Richardson and Levis and Hooker. I just feel like they feel like there's some good options that they can win with when he says that. It'll be interesting. To me, I think what could end up being Ballard's undoing, if this is his final year, is that record. When Irsay said he's not going to be judged by wins and losses, he's going to be judged by the direction that the franchise is going in. I still think the record plays into that. I mean, if they're 4-12 again or worse, 4-12-1 again or worse, it's going to be a hard sell. It just is. I mean, much like we were talking about Jeff Saturday after going 1-7 was going to be a hard sell to fans, and he absolutely was. You saw the outrage in the fan base until the head coach was named. If you go with 4 or fewer wins again, unless the rookie quarterback looks amazing, Peyton Manning was 3-13, threw a lot of interceptions, but I think there were a lot of people that still felt like, hey, he did a lot of good things too, and things are, there's a bright future with this kid. Unless it's a situation like that, that's where I think he could be in trouble. Just because if you've got a rookie quarterback that looks mid or worse, and your record is 4-12-1, 4-13, 3-14, 2-15, I think that's the scenario that they're moving on.
I guess what I would say from a record perspective is just that it depends who they take. It depends the plan. If they even take anyone, like if it's Hendon Hooker, let's say, and he can't play half the year and it's Gardner Minshew playing, like, again, we talk about this team, he's not very good. So if you have a situation where we're going to take Hendon Hooker, he's going to sit and rehab and learn the offense the entire year, and we're not going to play him. Maybe the last few games you want to throw him in there. And again, as a rookie, doesn't look very good and they lose games. If we're sitting here about a 3-14 team, I think that is, again, different. It's not as ugly as it was this past year where I think Chris Ballard will be back. Also, if there's not a quarterback they love, all 3 go, and they're sitting there again, this, we'll just punt it to next year. Or Richardson, again, red shirts, or, gets hurt, God forbid. And again, you're talking about Gardner Minshew starting, let's say, 14, 15 games. I just don't see a situation where the record would be the undoing of Chris Ballard just for 2023. Because, again, I think whether you have a quarterback or not, this team has a lot of holes. And again, we just saw them have the worst offense in the NFL last year. I don't think, even though they have a new coach that is competent, even though they're going to have a new quarterback that should not, no matter who's playing and how much they play, should not fumble the ball and turn the ball over as much as Matt Ryan did this past year, it's still going to be, I think, ugly from a record perspective because they're still far away from competing. Mm-hmm. So the record's going to be a tricky one. I just can't say right now, like if we're sitting here 3-14, let's just say 3-14 that they go without any sort of context. I'm not going to say automatically Chris Ballard's fired.
No, yeah, and I should clarify. I think it's 3-14 with the quarterback not looking like the guy, which you never want to make a decision after 1 year anyway. But if he has really struggled and there's just a lot of regret on that pick, that's where I think it becomes, because I think Irsay said it. It's about the direction of the franchise, which to me makes it really hard, because who's determining that?
Right.
He said everyone will know. You can always tell when things are heading the right way. But I don't think if we get 10 people in a room at the end of the year, they're all going to agree whether or not things are heading the right way, unless they've had, a magical 2012 style season and made the playoffs with this new quarterback. Then I think everyone would agree things are heading the right way. But if they're like you're talking about, you could be 3-14 and things could be heading the right way if you're looking at, certain elements, and you could be 8-9 and feel like they're not. I mean, it really just depends on all the different, how those pieces are. So I really think it really comes down to how much hope this rookie inspires, I guess. The long story short, I think Ballard's future and the franchise's future really comes down to how much hope this rookie is able to inspire, both in the fan base and in the roster around him. I think that's one thing that you can tell. How much does this team believe in the rookie quarterback?
True. Absolutely true there. Speaking of a rookie quarterback, George, let's wrap up the podcast with this. So the 5 quarterbacks we've been talking about a ton. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. Let's say everything breaks right for all 5 of these quarterbacks. They develop really well, they hit the ground running, and they meet their potential. Each of them hits their ceiling. What is the best case scenario for each of these 5 quarterbacks, and what could, again, if the Colts are lucky enough to get them, what could we possibly see them going forward here in this organization? Let's start with Bryce Young. I think best case scenario for Bryce Young, George, is him being Joe Burrow 2.0, where I think he could legitimately be one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL, be a Super Bowl champion. And the reason why I like the Joe Burrow comp is you look at both how they kind of play. They're very similar in the sense that there's not one physical tool that is better than any quarterback in the NFL. Like, you look at Joe Burrow, I ask you right now, like, what does he do the best? I'd argue it's more his mind, his ability to read defenses, quick processor, gets knows where to go with the football post snap. It's not like he doesn't have he's a solid arm. He's not the best arm in the NFL. He's not the most mobile. He's not the biggest, the strongest, the toughest. Oh, he's pretty damn tough. But it's like it's the mental side of the game that I would say is his biggest advantage, where he knows where to go with the ball, which makes him so great. I'll argue that's the same thing with Bryce Young. Again, Bryce Young, we know physically, imposing, he is something he is not, right? He has, I think, all the attributes solidly outside of weight, but he doesn't have the strongest arm. He's not the fastest or the most elusive of any of these quarterbacks in the draft. But just like Joe Burrow, his mental game, I think, is the strongest, where he knows where to go with the ball, can read defenses really well, get you out of bad plays, which is important as well. So for me, I kind of look at those 2 quarterbacks being very, very similar outside of, again, height and weight. So I could see if everything goes well for Bryce Young, he hits his ceiling, I think he could be Joe Burrow 2.0. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think if he hits his ceiling, he's definitely a top 5 guy in this league, which I think is huge. I look more along the lines of Deshaun Watson without the running element.
Or
just
off
sort
the
of,
field.
looking back to his rookie year, without the running element, without the massages. Yes, that's more of what I'm looking at here. I think when you look back to his rookie year, one of the biggest things he did was just create plays. And I think that's the number one thing to me with Bryce Young, is just no matter what play was called, he's going to find a way to make something good happen. And I just see that there's a little bit of Russell Wilson in there as well, just sort of that magic act in the backfield. That to me is what Bryce Young's going to look like if he hits on all of his possibilities. And a lot of that goes back to what you were talking about with the mental aspect of the game. He just sees the field so well. He knows what's going on before the snap so well that I think even when things don't go the way they're planned, Bryce is quickly able to kind of do that math in his head and realize, okay, well, the idea was to do this, but with the look that they've got and the route the routes that we're running, this will work now too. I think he can do that so fast. I think Joe Burrow's terrific at that. I think Russell Wilson was always really good about that. I think that's what you're going to see from Bryce Young.
How about CJ Stroud? Who's your comp, you think?
I think if he hits, and you're talking about the top of what he can
Best
do,
case.
which is our idea here. I think Justin Herbert. I think you're looking at something like that, where you've got big numbers. But the question is always, can he get this team over the top? Very similar to what he did at Ohio State, where you say, look, the numbers are incredible. He's somebody you don't want to play from week to week, but there are questions about whether or not he can win in the postseason. I think that's what you're going to see with him. So I'd say Justin Herbert, Phillip Rivers, that kind of QB.
I would go more Jared Goff in terms of a comp if everything works well. I think if you have a great team around CJ Stroud, similar to Jared Goff, we need a great team around him with the Rams. I think that quarterback is good enough, and CJ Stroud in this case is good enough to help you win a Super Bowl. I do. I'm not saying that, he's not someone you can trust in the playoffs. I think if the Colts do get CJ Stroud, I think that's still an absolute quarterback you can win a Super Bowl with. But I think you do need everything around him to be better. I have questions, just kind of like I have questions about Jared Goff of, can you elevate those around you? I think Bryce Young can, in part because he is, again, able to read a play so fast where he knows where to get the ball and put players in positions to succeed. With CJ Stroud, again, part of it's not his fault because when you're at Ohio State and you just have more talent than any other team you're playing against, it's hard to kind of show, can you elevate players around you when you're talking about playing with 4 potentially first-round wide receivers in your 2 years as a starter. But I do have questions about his ability to, again, if he goes to a team like the Colts that's not going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. or Chris Olave or Jackson Smith-Njigba or the reigning Rookie of the Year and Garrett Wilson, when you're not throwing them the ball, can you make Michael Pittman better? Can you elevate Alec Pierce's game around you? I don't right now have that conviction of, yes, that's absolutely the case. Also, my other question is, look, I know, again, everyone points to the Georgia game. He played great against Georgia, and that he did. My concern, though, is the fact that it took him up to that point, 95% of his career, he was not the quarterback we saw at Ohio State that he was at that Georgia game. Now, Daniel Jeremiah has talked about this a lot, and an old scouting adage that he keeps repeating is, if you've done it once, you can do it. So there's no doubt that CJ Stroud obviously can play at that level like he did against Georgia. We saw it. But my concern is for 95% of his career at Ohio State, the biggest games they played, against Michigan twice, against Oregon, even against Penn State, didn't play great. Now, they, in the case of at least Penn State, they beat him twice, but Oregon, they lost, and Michigan, they lost twice. He did not play well. So I don't feel great picking a guy who, in the biggest games of his career, for the most part, played his poorest. So that to me is concerning where, again, even though one game and you could look at Jordan and say, oh, look, he's great, he can play this way. My question is, well, we saw in one game, can you repeat it? Because in other instances against great opponents, he struggled. That's my concern.
But that's where my Herbert comp comes back in too, though, because I think there was a lot of that. Not so much necessarily the big game struggles, but there was a lot of, that the talent there is amazing. The year, his junior year, he was looked at as the number 1 overall pick potentially, and then he comes back, and there were a lot of question marks. And I think that Stroud has that ability that Herbert had to actually look even better as a pro than he did in college.
How about the man with the highest ceiling, George, Anthony Richardson? If he checks every box, if every piece of development goes his way, and he hits his, I would argue, the highest potential, the highest ceiling of any of these 4 or 5 quarterbacks we're going to talk about, what could we see from Anthony Richardson if everything works out?
Lamar Jackson. I mean, I think if everything works out, you're looking at a guy who could be an MVP in this league, which is obviously a really high ceiling. Once you can hit that, I think that's as big as it goes. The one question I have with him is, how much of the passing element is going to evolve for him. Because you look at Jalen Hurts and the way his passing ability was able to come along, in year 2 and in year 3, you need that element, I think, with him. If you can get that going, then yeah, the sky's the limit. I think he could surpass either Richardson, could surpass either Lamar or Cam Newton. If you're able to get that passing element in there. My concern with him, as it has been all along, is that you had 3 years at Florida and you never saw it on the field. Like, we know what the potential is, but it took him 3 years to win the starting job. And when he did, he was just okay. He wasn't a game changer. He didn't take over a contest. There are reasons that can lead to that, though. I mean, there's a lot of disarray in that Gators program right now, for instance, which
Yes.
may not speak well for the Colts because there's a lot of disarray here too.
He's to be
But
used to it.
I just, yeah, I mean, it should be a situation he's familiar with. I guess that's good for him. But I do think, I mean, it's not hard at all to look at the physical skills here and see if everything hits right. If you get some of these fundamentals, down, and you're able to develop him as a passer, that he could be, top of the line. I mean, if he's able to, I think Jalen Hurts, is the prototype here, but I think his running ability is even better than Jalen. So, there is no ceiling for him if everything fires.
If everything clicks, I think we could see him be Josh Newton, a combination of Josh Allen and Cam Newton. Where, again, if everything goes and breaks his way, I think he could be as good of a passer as Josh Allen and as good of a runner as Cam Newton. Like, I think he could honestly excel at both areas and truly be a legitimate dual threat where even with Cam outside of the MVP year, there's always questions of his accuracy and can he truly win you a game and be one of the best passers in the NFL. Lamar Jackson, that same question is there in terms of his ability to lead a team with his arm. If everything works out, I could see Richardson kind of being the best of both worlds where he can be one of the best passers like Josh Allen is, and also being one of the best runners at the same time and being that true dual threat. We know he's fast and athletic as hell. So in the open field, he's going to be a nightmare for any linebacker, any defensive back to try to chase down and tackle. If he can develop his accuracy, which just like Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming, massive questions to Josh Allen's credit and the Bills' credit too, because they did a great job developing him. They were able to refine that and get it to a point where his accuracy was no longer a question mark. And again, he has excelled as one of the better passers in the NFL. I think we could see Anthony Richardson, again, hit and be one of those true, legitimate dual threats where he could potentially be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, he could be, talent-wise, the best quarterback in the NFL because he would have an ability that Patrick Mahomes does not have in running the ball, while also having a very high ability to throw the ball. Again, the odds of that happening are very slim, but I think that's why he's such an intriguing prospect, because he could, if everything works out, George, I don't think it's a hot take to say he could be, in 5 years from now, the best quarterback in the NFL.
I don't think that's a hot take at all. If everything works out, there would be a lot of questions. How did he last to 3 or 4 or
right,
wherever he ends up going? There's no question about that. I mean, the physical ability is off the charts, literally. I mean, you go back to that combine. No one's had any day like that. And I still can't get over watching him just stand out there and throw the ball 50, 60 yards in the air, just flipping his wrist. Like, it's just, nothing, lobbing it 50, 60 yards. I mean, you can't teach that.
No.
It's, it's something you're born with. So there's no question. I don't know what percentage I would put on him hitting that, but there is no question his ceiling is, face of the NFL.
100%. Like I said, that's the biggest question is, what are the odds he actually reaches that? I would say slim, but yes, I think we are sitting here looking at a guy that legitimately 5 years from now could be easily the face of the NFL, putting the Colts in a situation maybe where the Chiefs are right now, where you are the team to beat each and every year going forward. Like, it is, the upside is high and extremely, extremely high if it does work out. What about Will Levis? I have a comp here. I have not seen this, right? I think there's been a lot of comps now since it's draft time. I have not seen this one. Let me know what you think, George. I think Will Levis, if everything works out, could be Mitch Trubisky in terms of being a flash in the pan. Now, he gets chided a lot for his time in Chicago. The fact is, I'm not trying to tell you Mitch Trubisky is this great quarterback or should be getting more credit than he got. He did make the playoffs twice in 4 years. So it wasn't like he was this bust of a pick where he was just an absolute atrocity and, was basically Jamarcus Russell 2.0. He wasn't 2 years or 4 years able to get the Bears to the playoffs twice. I think Will Levis is a quarterback that is good enough and talented enough to get a team like the Colts to the playoffs. But I just think there's too many inconsistencies, too many questions where I don't think he'll be able to consistently have success. That's the biggest question mark, is going to be consistency. So I think if you are drafting Will Levis, yes, I could see in year 2, year 3, the Colts are in the playoffs, and maybe if you're talking about 5 years, he can make the playoffs twice. Will the Colts ever be Super Bowl contenders with Levis? I don't think so. But I don't think he'll be this absolute bust where you're sitting there, and he's basically Josh Rosen 2.0. Can't wait to get rid of him after a year. I just think he'll leave you, especially at pick number 4, wanting more. But I think he will be talented enough to get you to the playoffs, just not talented enough to where you feel like, oh, this guy's worth giving a second contract to, which is why I'll go Mitch Trubisky.
I mean, if we're talking about best case scenario here,
Best case scenario,
everything absolutely, every single element comes together. I think the very best case scenario, and this is like less than 1%, is a poor man's Brett Favre with a little bit better athletic ability.
Wow.
And that I think the arm strength is real. I mean, he's probably the one guy who can get into a throwing contest with Anthony Richardson and not look terrible in this draft. Anybody else, if we're talking arm strength, is probably going to look like a severe lesser passer. The arm strength is terrific, but the Brett Favre comparison to me comes from, there was always to the end with Brett Favre, even when he's winning the Super Bowl, even when the Packers were going, deep in the playoffs, there was always that I'm going to throw it across my body into triple coverage and an interception that might kill the team. And I think you're always going to have that with Will Levis. You're going to have to live with both ends of it. He's going to make some plays that are just eye popping. And I think he's got better running ability. So, in that regard, he's probably closer to Josh Allen. And that's probably you keep hearing that comp a lot, and that's why that's probably the ceiling for him is Josh Allen. But this year's Josh Allen, where the interception total is a little worrisome, and you wonder, if you could rein that in, how good could he be? That's what I see with it, because the arm talent is exceptional. I don't know if there's any question about that, and I think he can read defenses. I don't think that's a big problem. I just think at times, because of that arm strength, he makes the wrong decision because he thinks his arm can make it right. And I don't think you're ever going to get that out of it. In that regard, like the name I always bring up with him is Carson Wentz. I think they're different guys off the field. I think that Levis is a very good leader. I think that's one thing that puts him different than Wentz. But, Wentz would tell us every week, he's not going to change who he is. He's got that gunslinger mentality. And, that to me is going to be Levis. You're going to have, if you take Will Levis, you're going to have to live with the fact that he's going to turn the ball over. Not a lot, maybe, but he's going to turn the ball over. And it's going to be a couple times a year where you're kind of questioning. So I would think Andrew Luck, I would think Brett Favre, I would think Josh Allen, that kind of quarterback where is his ceiling, where, there's really good things. You just hope that he overcomes the bad, the way Andrew always did, the way Josh Allen usually does, the way Brett Favre usually did. That's best case scenario. I'm not saying that's who he'll be, but this is about, hey, if they're the best version of themselves, that's what I see for Will Levis.
I like the Brett Favre comp a lot because I think you're spot on in terms of it's confidence, maybe borderline arrogance of, I have a howitzer. I can fit this ball in anywhere. I don't care if the DB's making a break. I'm going to throw it so hard in here that he's not going to be able to catch it. And like I said, especially Kentucky, we've seen those DBs make plays and those go to interceptions. And Brett Favre, like I said, his entire career never got through to him that, hey, you don't have to make every heroic throw, or you could sometimes be conservative. He thought his arm was golden, was going to make every single throw. And I think you're right in terms of if you get Will Levis, he'll make some holy crap. That was an insane far hash to far sideline, 30, 50 yards down the field. What an absolute dime. And the next play, throwing right to the middle linebacker, saying, what the hell are you doing? Why would you throw that? Or throwing a double coverage and basically have only one read on the play. Which is why I kind of go back to Mitch Trubisky in terms of just like the inconsistency, where I think he can be good enough in a year to get you to the playoffs, get you there, but the consistency is going to be one of those big time frustrations where it's not going to be every year you're in the playoffs, and it's not going to be kind of taking you to the ceiling that you want. That's for sure. How about your guy, which well, maybe now not your guy anymore since earlier in the podcast you're talking about taking Will Levis or Anthony Richardson over your guy Hendon Hooker, but we talk about best case scenario for Hendon Hooker, George. In your mind, what is it?
Hooker's still my guy. I'm just afraid that
Okay.
the plan might not work. Which is,
He's your
when am
guy
I
so
not?
much you're
Gets
afraid
to
that
April.
past 4 he's going to go at like number 5 or
Yeah.
number 6.
Yeah, Seattle's guy at number 5. He'll be gone. He's out. This is my Joe Burrow, just in terms of the way he plays the game. And a lot of it has to do with the deep ball, in all honesty. When I watched some of the throws he made at Tennessee, you could close your eyes and see Joe Burrow at LSU, just put that ball right where it needed to be. The receivers absolutely in stride. It's the spot that it needed to be in, and it becomes a big play. And I think some of the questions are similar too, in terms of when Joe Burrow was there. Well, he had Justin Jefferson, he had Jamar Chase. Is he really the guy when he's playing with them? And you're hearing that now with Tennessee in Hendon Hooker. Well, look at those receivers. Look at the way that offense was run. I just think there's a lot there, and both of them transformative players in the SEC. LSU is down a little bit when Joe Burrow got there. He comes in, has the first year that's good. They go to a bowl game. No one's thinking he's the number 1 pick in the draft.
No,
but it's a good year. And then the next year they're national champions, and there's, and it's off to the races. And the Joe Burrow we know now. Hendon Hooker, very similar arc in that sense. You came to a Tennessee team trying to get back to its previous glory. First year, good year, go to a bowl. Hey, he's not bad. This year, if he doesn't get hurt, they're not going to win the national championship, but who knows, where that ends. They're probably in a BCS bowl or whatever it is now, New Year's Six bowl. They're probably playing in a marquee game. And he maybe is the Heisman winner if he doesn't get hurt. I don't think that's a crazy, prediction. So for me, I just, that's, if everything goes well, if he comes back healthy, and he's absolutely hits his full potential, which again is what we're talking about here. I see a Joe Burrow type of player with more of a running element than you see from Burrow, which is, again, and that's why I think, just looking at this, if all these guys hit, there's a reason why people believe in all these guys hit. The ceiling is like top 5-ish kind of guy in this league if they hit their absolute best. I think that the trick here is figuring out which guy has the best chance to do that.
Right. And that's obviously the question with each of these quarterbacks is they have upside, but also there are flaws or questions with each of the 5 that make you wonder, well, how realistic is hitting these best case scenarios? We're talking and living in a perfect world where all 5 do come to fruition. Reality is, like I said, 1, maybe 2 of these guys actually do hit their full potential, and 1 or 2 teams are fired up. Hopefully, fingers crossed, one of those 2 teams are the Colts. I will go for Hendon Hooker, best case scenario. I'll say Dak Prescott. I think he could be a really solid pro. He's athletic. The funny thing is, I was kind of looking up his numbers too, and even rewatching a little bit of Tennessee. He's athletic. He's mobile. Hendon Hooker, that is, doesn't run as much as you think. And I feel like for Dak Prescott, it's kind of the same thing where he flushes out of the pocket a lot, but he does not run really anywhere near as maybe as he, well, definitely as much as he used to at Mississippi State. They ran him almost kind of like a Cam Newton kind of quarterback there, back there, Dan Mullen. But does not run anywhere near as much as you would think. I think he can absolutely run the offense. Very mature, really good leader. I don't think he's going to be able to lead you to a Super Bowl. I have doubts about Dak Prescott. I think I have doubts about Hendon Hooker. But just like Dak, if you're the Cowboys, you look around, how many quarterbacks are that much better than Dak Prescott? 8. Like, I think Dak Prescott is a top 10 quarterback now, towards the end of the top 10, probably 9 or 10. So there's a handful of guys that you could do better at. You're not going to have, the ability to get any of them. And there's a whole hell of a lot of guys you can do a lot worse than Dak Prescott with. I think that's how you'll feel about Hendon Hooker in 5-10 years from now, where he's really solid. I think he can be a franchise quarterback for 10 years. Is he going to get you to a Super Bowl? I don't think so, personally. I don't think he's good enough to get you to the promised land. But again, there's going to be, I think, a whole hell of a lot more quarterbacks that you could do a lot worse with than Hendon Hooker. So I'm sorry to rain on your parade.
No, like I said,
you're saying Joe Burrow. I know. I'm sorry, to knock you down, but hopefully, if teams are listening, they'll leave Hendon Hooker and maybe push him down the draft so the Colts can get him later on.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think there's too many questions about Hooker. There's no way anyone
Yes.
should be going after him. This injury, he may not even ever come back. He may not even be the same guy. You can't risk it.
I can't. Oh man, George, I know you're more of, technically media, so I guess jersey sales or jersey wearing is not maybe par for the course for the job, but I think we got to get a number 5 Hooker jersey if that's where the Colts are, just for your Hendon Hooker standing, going back like way earlier, way even before the Colts lost out on pick number 1. You were a big Hendon Hooker guy, Hendon Hooker guy, really even going into the while the season was still going on, but we already kind of looked past that
During the year. Yeah, no, during the year I have been.
That was your guy.
And I'll tell you what, when we met them at the combine, and granted, it's even worse than the speed dating the teams do because it's not one-on-one. So, you're getting a very brief look at these guys. But I came away from the combine liking him even more than I did going in. I love his attitude. I love his makeup. He's a guy that I would be very comfortable with if I was Chris Ballard making this pick. And I think it's a guy Chris Ballard will really like, but I also think Anthony Richardson's ceiling is so enticing. Will Levis's arm strength is so enticing. You can make a case for, and we just did, you can make a case for any of these guys, and it's realistic. Again, it comes down to who is most likely to put it together and do it on the field.
And if you're a bean lover, he has a Hendon Hooker that has a big partnership with Bush's Beans. So if you like Bush's Beans, there's another reason to love Hendon Hooker. He has his own style, the Hooker bean or the Hendon bean. I think it's called one of the two. To look it up exactly, but he's got
his own
good deal.
See, I didn't even know that he's got his own bean already.
Got his own bean. What else is there not to love?
Take him at 4. Just take him at 4 now. I mean, just don't even look away. Come on.
Don't even risk it.
Do you get like a lifetime supply of that?
Oh, I think Chris Ballard, if he takes it 4, absolutely, we'll have no shortage of Hendon Hooker, Bush's Beans. That's for sure. That is without a doubt.
He'll have some other problems, but he won't have.
That's true.
He won't have a problem with beans.
That is for sure. Maybe that could be the selling point when he does meet him and do the top 30 visit. That could be the finishing point there for sure. So that'll do it for this edition of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Really do appreciate you tuning in and making us a part of your day right here. Make sure you check us out on YouTube if you haven't, the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Subscribe there. Every single episode is uploaded in video form. If you want to look at our dazzling faces that are made for TV, without a doubt. If you are watching the pod and want to check it out listening-wise, make sure you check us out, the Blue Horseshoe Pod, wherever you do get your podcasts. The bright blue logo is where you can find our brand new feed, where all the new episodes are uploaded as well. So make sure you check us out. If you want to ask us a question, we are here to answer your biggest pressing Colts questions. Send each and every question to bluehorseshoepod@gmail.com, bluehorseshoepod@gmail.com. Very simple, very easy. We will answer your questions on the podcast as well. So have a great rest of your week. We will be back soon right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.